Grenada, land of ours, we pledge ourselves to thee. Heads, hearts, and hands in unity to reach our destiny. Ever conscious of God, being proud of our heritage, may we with faith and courage aspire, build, advance. As one people, one family, God bless our nation. Thank you.
Please remain standing as we now invite to do the invocation and land acknowledgement Sharon Lindiona Pascal, who is a proud descendant of the Grenada indigenous community and also a member of the Reparations Committee.
Pleasant good evening to everyone. May we bow our heads in prayer, please. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Father God, I come to you this evening with thanksgiving in my heart. Father, I ask that you please bless this evening's event. Father God, bless each and every one gathered here. Oh Lord, Father, I ask that the people who are on their way, Lord, that you hasten their steps. I also pray, Lord, that you give them traveling mercies, that they will get here safely. And as we sit here this evening at the Bubb's Report's 5th anniversary event and annual lecture, Lord, I ask that you are present, for it is said in the Bible that where 2 or 3 are gathered, there you are also. And I also pray that this evening's proceedings goes as smoothly as possible and effectively. And I ask this prayer in your holy and mighty name. Amen. Okay, you may have your seats, please. Again, I say good evening. Today we join the Bubb Report to acknowledge and to honor the land on which we stand, that previously was known by its original inhabitants as the island of Camahorn, by its original inhabitants, the great Kalinago people. As a descendant myself of the Kalinago people, I would like to honor all the ancestral stewards of this land on which we meet here today. And the descendants in Grenada and the Caribbean. The Windward Islands, including Grenada, faced colonization by European powers, primarily the French and the British, leading to the displacement and marginalization of indigenous peoples, specifically the Caribs and Arawaks. This colonial history marks a profound loss of traditional lands, cultural practices, and social structures. We also acknowledge the work of the Grenada National Reparations Committee in striving for the legal acknowledgement of the land rights of the indigenous peoples of these islands. In Grenada and neighboring islands, The journey towards formal recognition continues with determination and spirit. We also acknowledge and work to dismantle the ongoing violence and repression of indigenous peoples and cultures around the world. We also would like to acknowledge the contemporary tribal leaders and other tribe members in St. Vincent and Dominica, whose contributions towards indigenous recognition is right and just. Indigenous land rights in Grenada and the Windward Islands represent a rich blend of historical journeys, cultural significance, and contemporary challenges. Addressing these issues requires a collaborative, multifaceted approach that honors indigenous identities, while creating a future of development that benefits all communities. Together, we can commit to a path of legal recognition and environmental sustainability, celebrating the strength and spirit of indigenous peoples. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pascal, for the land acknowledgement as well as the opening prayer. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today celebrating the Bubb Report 5th anniversary. I think that deserves a round of applause. And in case you don't know what the Bubb Report is, it is a weekly Grenadian American diaspora current affairs program. It takes place weekly on Sunday, live streamed on Facebook as well as YouTube, and also on WPG-10 as well as the Grenada Broadcasting Network. And it started 5 years, 5 days ago, on the 10th of May, 2020. So we know what was happening then, pandemic. And at that time, funny enough, it started after Dr. Kellon Bubb heard the call and started this current affairs program following the passing of George Grant, one of the persons we are honoring here this evening. I am your chair for this evening's proceedings, Crystalline Lashington, and I'm excited to be here as a media practitioner as well. I enjoy doing television and radio presenting, and I think it's just fantastic that the Bubb Report is hosting an event like this that brings together Caribbean leaders and discussing topics that really matter to us, not just in Grenada, not just in the Caribbean, but also in the diaspora. At this point in time, we'll have a little rhythm to get us going. I invite all the way from Crown City, St. Patrick, D Unity Group. D-Unity Drum Group. All right. In existence for only 1 year, and I'm sure we'll be seeing more of them soon. Now, what I gave you, let's call it a soft welcome, all right? Because we have a King's Council to give you a formal welcome to this evening's event. We are going to welcome on stage attorney at law, community leader, as well as a media practitioner, because we do hear him on the radio giving legal information, awareness, education. Let's welcome, to do the formal welcome, Mr. Ruggles Ferguson, KC.
Good evening. Okay. Are you hearing me? Yes. Okay, thank you. Former Prime Minister Tillman Thomas, Honorable Emmeline Pierre, Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Peter David, Parliamentary Representative for the Tongue of St. George, and the face of the movement, I should probably add. Guest speaker, Dr. Didacus Jules. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, forgive me if I have not mentioned all the special invitees and guests in the audience. I suppose the protocol list will be developed as we move along with the program this evening. The pleasure is mine to give the formal remarks at this very important and landmark lecture event this evening, focusing on the topic, Bucking the Trend, Strategies for Caribbean Growth Amidst Global Economic Volatility. And of course, to deliver on this very timely, current topic is no less a person than the OECS Director General, Dr. Didacus Jules, whom we are all familiar with. I was trying to check the number of lectures I've heard Dr. Jules deliver over the years. And what I can say is that in this very space, in the annex and virtually, I've been associated with quite a few of these lectures. The George Brizan lecture several years ago, and I will urge the organizers of that very important lecture to revive it. We had the March 13th lecture about 2 or 3 years ago. Then there was the Carol Bristol lecture again several years ago, and we have this inaugural lecture this evening. Dr. Jules is truly the lecturer, the public lecturer of the OECS, probably the premier public lecturer of the OECS. And I'm really happy to be associated with this event because this is the start, no doubt, of many lectures to come. Annual lectures. I've been assured by Dr. Bubb that the event is intended to be an annual one. And I have urged almost in every organization that I belong to the need for public lectures. So we have fora to engage in so many important topics and to get the best of the region like we do in the Archibald Ned Memorial Lecture, started back in 1996. And this year, or last year, we had the landmark 20th lecture, and that marked the longest running lecture series by any bar association, not just in the OECS, not just in the Caribbean, but in the Commonwealth. And, and what these lectures do, this is not a lecture just for the participants, as I always say, attending this evening, but it is recorded for posterity, for future generations, not even sitting with us this evening, because we have the benefit, based on technology or the written text, that will be used, no doubt, as part of the intellectual material to assist in the shaping of society in the future. Now let me say, and publicly say, I've told Dr. Bubb on many occasions how proud I am of him and his development over the years. He has been interviewing me for 25 years now, since back in 2001, when I was president of the Grenada Bar Association, and of course an active practitioner, yes, and particularly when he was associated with CC6. So I've seen him develop from young Kellon to Mr. Kellon Bubb, and now proudly today, Dr. Kellon Bubb. And let me ask you for a special round of applause for him. I know, being associated with so many lectures myself over the years, that this is not an easy event to put together. We all hear it may look simple, but lots of logistics go into it, resources go into it. And he has been able, in his just short 5 years, in celebration of his 5th anniversary, to leave with us and to create this, what I hope to be an institutional activity, I think is really, really commendable. And even up to, I think was it last Sunday, so he has been interviewing me since 2001, up to last week Sunday, or week before Sunday, I can't remember, but up to very recently. And what is particularly important, and we must never lose sight of, is the fact that it's not just a lecture, but it's a lecture in recognition of 3 stalwarts in media: George Grant, Leslie Pierre, and Lou Smith. Lou Smith is a seasoned broadcaster going back to the early 70s. And I always make the point that part of the shortcomings of us in the region, our leaders, and the leaders of organizations, is that we don't recognize our own people. And this truly is an event where we have now media practitioners being recognized. And as many would know, that I was particularly close to George Grant, who passed away 5 years ago on the 27th of April, 2020. And Kellon, in fact, told me he was the last to appear on George Grant's program, Sundays with George Grant. And what is remarkable about Kellon too, as our MC indicated, this program started on May 10th or thereabouts. And Sundays with George Grant was an established institutional program. And Kellon was able to take it. Not that he had planned that program, but he took up the mantle from George Grant and started the Bubb Report just 2 or 3 weeks after George had passed away, filling that vacuum. And I know George will be extremely proud of him. And again, I ask that we give a special round of applause to Kellon. And just let me make a few remarks in relation to George Grant. You will hear more about him this evening. But I did a program, Law Made Simple, with George for 10 consecutive years, from about 2010 or thereabouts, every week until he passed away in April 2020. And as we know, April 2020 was in the midst of COVID. So the program was physical. We moved it around in terms of times, but I attended physically at the studio, and we have long discussions after the program. And I also attended Sundays with George Grant on conquest occasions. And George was really passionate. He was balanced. He was fair. He gave a voice to the voiceless. And George accommodated all ideas, just as Kellon is doing now. But I remember the week before, the 27th, we started to do it online. And he called me just before the program, about an hour before, saying he was not feeling well. And for George to say, well, you're not feeling well, George is a man, you're always okay. But he was a bit under the weather, not really complaining, under the weather, so he said, let's postpone this week until, so we do it the following week. So generally, either he will contact me if there's any issue, or I will contact him just before turning up to the program. And on April 27th, that day I was scheduled to appear on the program at 5 o'clock. Fortunately, we were doing it virtually, and I remember I was in the midst of doing some legal submissions to file the next morning. But I felt I have a commitment, and I know every week I must do it. I missed the week before. So at 4:36 that afternoon, I WhatsApp George, as I would normally do, to indicate to him, and I actually have the, yes, April 26, 27 at 4:35. So I used to call him fondly Georgie P. So I said, Georgie P, are we on today? Available if you are. And the topic was the Constitution and the leader of the opposition. Who's the leader of the opposition then? Whatever. But we are doing the Constitution and the leader of the opposition. And I said, let me know. And I was kind of half hoping, because I needed to finish these legal submissions, that somehow the program would not come off that evening, that you would say, let's skip for the week after. But generally, he would respond immediately or within 10, 15 minutes. He did not respond. 5 o'clock came, and the messages remained unopened. 5:15, 5:30, the messages remained unopened. There was no contact. But in any event, I happily completed the legal submissions the evening. And only later on that evening, to my absolute dismay, I received the news that he had passed away. It was obvious, based on all the information I received after, that he had passed away already when I was messaging him for that particular program. He was really dedicated. He was really passionate. He believed in public education, and he supported all the lectures of the Grenada Bar Association over the years, carrying them live. And that is why I feel really special about this evening, because somebody is at long last recognizing the work of George Grant through this lecture. So let me just formally welcome you. Sit back, relax, learn, soak in the learnings and recommendations, no doubt, of Dr. Jules, and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson, for that warm welcome and, of course, stories and information, and I'm sure we'll get a lot more as the evening progresses. Now we invite the president of the Media Workers Association of Grenada, just a few days into her term as president, to give an address on behalf of MWAG, Ms. Callistra Farrier.
Members of Parliament, former Prime Minister Thurman Thomas, Attorney General Claudia Joseph, members of the business community, and other important invited guests here tonight. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Media Workers Association of Grenada, I bring warm salutations to Dr. Bubb, Dr. Kellen Bubb, and to everyone gathered here. Congratulations, Kellen, on getting to 5 years of the Bubb Report. You've been doing a marvelous job, and we're all very proud of you. And this is an important moment, very, very important. And in the welcome remarks, Mr. Ferguson did touch a lot on that. And it's a moment of reflection, appreciation, and rededication of the craft of journalism and also of development. We're here to honor towering figures in Grenadian media, Leslie Pear, Lou Smith, and George Grant, whose dedication to truth, service, and public discourse shaped the very foundations of modern journalism in this country to a large extent. Leslie Pear was a fearless newspaper editor. He was also a founding member of the Grenada Press Association, and the Media Association, of course, came after. He understood the press as a pillar of democracy, and Kellen would understand that, how very passionate he was with us as he trained us, because we both trained in the University of Leslie Pear, as we call it. Lou Smith, of course, with his unmistakable voice and enduring presence on the airwaves, informed and connected generations of Grenadians. And George Grant, who brought both integrity and accessibility to radio journalism, ensured the people always had a voice and a space to be heard. We also must recall, as we honor these three great men, those who came even before them, such as William Galloway Donovan, who held the editorial line in the 1930s, and Theophilus Albert Marishaw, publisher of the West Indian newspaper. His tagline, West Indies for West Indians, still resonates today as a call for regional identity and unity. Marishaw was a pioneer of advocacy journalism, boldly using the press to champion self-governance and the cause of the Caribbean people. We remember Alistair Hughes, a steady, dependable voice during the turbulence of the 1970s, a time when clarity and courage were more important than ever. These men laid the path and blazed the trail that we now walk. It is on the shoulders of these giants that we stand, their words echoing in our ears as we carry forward the mission of a free and responsible press. Their principles guiding our pens and microphones as we strive to uphold the highest standards of the profession. So let this summit inspire us to carry forward their legacy with integrity, curiosity, and unflinching commitment to the truth. Once again, congratulations, Dr. Bubb. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. And now we begin our tributes to the media leaders who have transitioned. We will be paying tribute to Mr. Lou Smith, Mr. George Grant, and Mr. Leslie Pierre. To start us off with the tribute to Mr. Lou Smith, I welcome to the stage veteran broadcaster and now a children's book author, Miss Sherma Wells.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Madam Chair. I first want to thank Dr. Bubb. It feels so good to see Dr. Bubb for this awesome opportunity paying tribute to a dear friend and colleague in media, George Llewellyn Smith. Paying tribute to this legendary broadcaster and reflecting on his career over several decades that touched the lives of countless listeners and viewers can only be described as a phenomenal intervention, like a comet entering the Grenada's broadcast landscape. Lou Smith, at the time of discovery, was employed by Jonas Brown and Hubbards. With an unescapable radio voice, he was ushered into broadcasting, and the rest is history. Excellence in broadcasting, unwavering dedication, an indelible mark on the broadcast industry, insightful commentary, and a deep passion for journalism, an incomparable stalwart broadcaster. These and more are all synonymous with the name Lou Smith. His awesome compassion and dedication to his craft has left a legacy that has shaped many young and promising practitioners, especially in the scribing of news and features. Lou was committed to delivering the truth with integrity. He held in a deep respect for the listening public and felt a sense of responsibility to deliver information based on facts and not distorted for the purpose of fame. His distinctive voice resonated across the region with profound respect for unwavering commitment to truth. He became a household name across the islands as he served at various stations locally and internationally, including WIBS, Radio Antilles, Kana Radio, Voice of America, VOA, Radio Grenada, Radio Free Grenada, Discovery Television, YSFM, GBC, and Grenada Broadcasting Network. Lou also wrote for the Associated Press and the United Press International. He was the only broadcaster journalist to travel with the then Prime Minister, Maurice Bishop. Standing so tall among his contemporaries in the region, he was also fitting to parallel any international journalist. His contribution to the field of journalism are immeasurable and have earned him great respect in the industry. As a broadcaster, journalist, general manager, news director, or host, he managed each position with high principled standards of excellence. Lou Smith, and if I may add, it's L-L and not L-E-W, right, Joy? L-L-E-W, and he was very, very particular about the right spelling of his Lou. Lou Smith's hosting of GBN's To The Point as part of the early morning show plummeted him into one of the most listened to personality in the industry. Transitioned into television brought with it a new frontier, and his success with Beyond the Headlines secured the most talked about nighttime program dealing with socioeconomic to political issues affecting the nation. His coverage of major events, from political elections to natural disasters, demonstrated his skill in providing comprehensive and in-depth reporting. In an industry often plagued with sensationalism, Lou Smith stood out as a voice of reason and integrity. His unwavering adherence to journalistic principles set a standard for others to follow. Lou's impact on journalism is evident in the numerous accolades he received throughout his career. His dedication to ethical reporting and his insistence on thorough research earned him the respect of colleagues and viewers alike. He was conferred an OBE for his excellence in broadcasting. Reflecting on Lou Smith's remarkable career, we also celebrate the person behind the microphone. Lou's kindness, generosity, and unwavering dedication to his craft left a lasting impression on all who had the privilege of knowing him. As we pay tribute to Lou, we honor a life dedicated to delivering news and programs with honesty and, of course, integrity. His voice may no longer grace the airwaves, but his impact will continue to inspire and guide future generations in the broadcast industry. A man steeped in culture, Lou grew up in the neighborhood of the Wharf, Green Street to be exact. Yes, Green Street is part of the Wharf, where band leaders like Awe and Ken Sylvester were master mass band leaders. Lou had a great passion for mass, and by extension, his love for pan, which was a stone's throw away in the Coles Market on the Carenage. Lou was very instrumental in keeping pan relevant on his Saturday morning's pan program on GBN. He kept the pan industry alive and relevant. His hosting of carnival shows and other memorable events was approached with the same excellence and passion, and on many occasions, he was the sought-after master of ceremony. I had the pleasure of working with him on numerous occasions. He was also a mentor to many aspiring broadcasters, journalists. His willingness to share his knowledge and experience helped shape the careers of future generations in the industry, including Dr. Bubb. Lou's legacy is not only reflected in his own achievements, but also in the success of those who he guided and inspired. George Llewellyn Smith, Cousin Lou, 002, the Dark One, will always be remembered as a true icon, a distinguished media gentleman, a broadcaster extraordinaire. His contributions to the media landscape will forever be remembered and celebrated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. And now we honor Mr. George Grant. I invite to the stage a close friend and avid viewer and listener of the George Grant Sunday program, Ms. Sharon Roberts.
Good evening, everybody. I could feel myself getting really emotional, especially when Ruggles, shall I say, you copy me. I was about to say just about everything that you said. So I have a little backup. I was in this unique position of being involved with all three gentlemen being honored here tonight. I feel honored that Dr. Bubb had asked me to do a tribute to my beloved friend and colleague, George Grant. Note I didn't say the late George Grant, because if you know George, he was seldom late, and he will never be late for me. When my family moved to Grenada in 1965, we moved to Green Street, and the house behind me was Lou Smith. A few years later, in 1976, as a young teacher in Vendome, it was Lou Smith who took me under his wings when the then Prime Minister decided to punish me. He didn't want me to waste my August vacation, so he sent me to read news at the then Radio Grenada. And it was Lou Smith who took me under his wings. What the Prime Minister didn't know, that he sparked an interest for me in journalism. And I worked with WNK in England, a Jamaican radio station. I came back to Grenada and met the great Leslie Pierre. He was my mother's friend, my parents' friend. And I remember the day after I got back, he called me. He said, "You're in Grenada to sit on your mother's hand, or you're looking for work?" I went to see him and started immediately. I had to call my mother and say, "Look after my children. I'm working with Leslie Pierre." I became his photographer and sub-editor. And then there's George. It seems like I've always known George. I would pick him up at 4:30 in the morning, and we'd go to the beach. We walk the beach from one end to the other, and would then go into the water where we held Parliament. They still hold Parliament every morning in the sea. But George would go and he told me one day, bring a sheet to the beach. And I said, bring a sheet for what? It was grape season. I brought one of my best sheets, thinking George wanted a sheet. He spread it under the grape tree. And when I shook the grape, you could imagine my sheet by the time I got home. But everybody in the sea got grapes that morning. It is just, it's really, really hard to still talk about George after 5 years. We did a radio program every Wednesday. And once we started, we never missed a Wednesday from wherever I was in the world. So we did programs from Peter Martinique, Belize, the UK, US, even from Bulgaria. Because wherever I was, George would find me and there would be a program. The Saturday before George passed, he called me because I would always call the police who lived not too far from me and say I have to bring food for George Grant. And they would give me permission to go and bring lunch for him during COVID. And when he called this Saturday, he said he just went to the supermarket and he's tired, can't find a taxi to go home. I said, you want me to come and meet you? He said, give me 5 minutes. Then he called and said he got home. And this Sunday, I'm listening to him, and I keep thinking, what's wrong? He was interviewing Tobias Clement. And Dr. Bubb was co-hosting, I must say, because ever so often, George would say, Kellon, you take that one. And I'm listening, and I'm thinking, what's wrong? So immediately he came off the program. I called him and I said, well, what's wrong? He said, I'm so tired. I said, well, go and rest. He said, no, I have to prepare a program for tomorrow. And about 3 o'clock this Sunday afternoon, I saw a message from him, and it was a song, My Life is in Your Hands. I found out later that his brother Ian sent that song for him that morning. At 9 o'clock the Monday morning, I messaged him. And then I got a call from Belize that one of my sons had collapsed and was taken to hospital. So the night I didn't go to bed until I heard that my son was okay. And I was going into bed and I said to my husband, I said, that's funny, I haven't heard from George today. He didn't answer any of my messages, he didn't answer my calls. And the next morning, I got the news that he was gone. It's still hard. But it is just right and fitting, I think, that it was Dr. Kellon Bubb that picked up the baton, I must say, because he was the last person to co-host the program with George. And I know George is pleased. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for that moving tribute. And now we invite to honor Mr. Leslie Pear, former Prime Minister, former journalist, and also a founding board member of the Grenada Voice newspaper, the Honorable Tillman Thomas.
Honorable Emlyn Pear, Leader of Her Majesty's Opposition, Senator Claudette Joseph, Honorable Peter David, Member of Parliament for the Town of St. George, Dr. Kellon Bubb, other distinguished ladies, gentlemen, members of the media, good night to you all. Well, let me begin by commending Dr. Bubb for recognizing three men who have contributed substantially toward our democracy and our democratic institutions. Now, who was Leslie Pierre? Leslie Pierre was a family man. Leslie Pierre was a businessman, a community-oriented man. For those of us who knew him in the Scout movement as a commissioner of Scouts and the Rotary Club, he was associated with that organization. He was a journalist and also a man of faith. He was very courageous and determined. And we saw the manifestation of that courage in 1981. In 1981, in 1979, the People's Revolutionary Government amended the Newspaper Act. And the new amendment required a minimum of 26 members to register a company and publish a newspaper. According to the revolutionary thinking, the existing law, under the existing law, one person could have established a company and formed a newspaper, and that was regarded as a bourgeoisie law. So they revolutionized the law. Now, Leslie Pierre embarked upon a courageous and historic mission to mobilize 26 persons to form a company to publish that newspaper. And in the month of April 1981, about April, I recently started to practice law in Grenville, and I walked into the office of the late Ben Jones in search of a precedent to do a conveyance. And I ran into Leslie Pierre there. I met him there. I didn't know much about him. I had heard about him. And he invited me to be a shareholder. And I didn't hesitate. I told him I'd go along and sign up to be part of the Grenadian Voice. Subsequently, the company was registered, and by the middle of June 1981, the first publication came out. But before the second publication, on the 11th of July 1981, we were detained. I mean, early Saturday morning, some soldiers knocked on my door, and they told me they'll come with them for questioning. Well, I went along with them. They drove me from Hermitage right down to the fort. When I got to the fort, it was a big sheeting door, a big metal sheet door, and it's in barbed wire at the top. And when they opened up the door, I saw Leslie and Lloyd sitting there, and I had to laugh. So we spent about 2 years and 3 months being detained. And during that period, we had extensive discussions. And I discovered some of the values that Leslie stood for. Well, integrity, honesty, the right of people to protect the right of the citizen, and the right to publish newspaper, because the law was amended, he complied with the law, and yet still he was detained. Now, Leslie saw information as a public good. And he saw himself not as a subject, but as a citizen. And as a citizen, you have rights. And you should not let anybody trample upon your rights. And if you know Leslie. He wouldn't let anybody trample on his rights. As a matter of fact, when I read that scripture in Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, he said, God gave you a spirit of power, not timidity. I always remember Leslie. There was nothing timid about Leslie. He had that power to fight. And there you have this man who went about, mobilized 26 persons. And in those days, it was a difficult task. Because at that time, just about anybody who took a stand that is not consistent with the revolution, I mean, you could end up in trouble. But Les decided that that power was with him, that spirit that Paul spoke about was in Les, and he went about and he did it. So I believe that Leslie has left a great legacy, especially for journalists. I mean, I don't think you'll find journalists as courageous as Les today. I mean, they're in a revolutionary atmosphere. Leslie went about to publish the Grenadian Voice. How many of the journalists today would set up a lobby to ask for the Freedom of Information Act in a democratic setting? You know the same thing. I'm just comparing. They had a man in a situation where they were going around the place, a revolutionary atmosphere, and he took that stand. I think that's a great legacy for those in the field of journalism. Again, I said to her, Les was a man of faith. He spoke a lot about his family, and he was an Anglican. And the Anglican priest in St. George's visited the prison, visited Leslie together with us on a regular basis. And they discovered the spiritual side of the man. See, I didn't know much about him before, but at 2 years and 3 months we spent as political detainees, I discovered we had certain things in common, especially in terms of defending your right and standing up for what is right. Because people tend to just yield because those in authority may take a stand. You do not necessarily have to go along with them. One of the things that I myself was sort of taken aback during that period was when the Catholic Focus was closed down. I felt that the church should have taken a stronger stand. You don't have to give up if you're doing something that is right. Because I believe if the church had taken a stand, and if Grenadians generally stood up for what is right, our history would have been different. It's because, you see, deprivation of information could be a dangerous thing. You know, I mean, people need to be informed so that they could take a stand. And it's not only government that monopolizes information. There are other institutions and organizations that do it. But when you have people as Leslie Pierron, they would fight to ensure that information is being shared. Because the information ought to be a public right. And we all would benefit if we live in an atmosphere where there is the free flow of information. So the legacy of Leslie Pierre is something I think that we all should try to maintain and to continue that defending the institutions, the democratic institutions in particular, the fruitless state. Because as somebody put it, information poverty could lead could impede our development as a people. So those in the field of journalism, you have a great task ahead of you. And nothing should be done to deprive the public of information. But there are times when journalists become political. They compromise. You compromise yourself, and you cannot really speak out and deal with the truth. You have to be independent. Again, and Les was very independent. Leslie was very, those of you who used to read, if you read his personally speaking, I mean, he took a stand. I mean, it doesn't matter who is offended, but the right is always right, as that's the motto of the Voice. The right is always right. And after he came out of prison, he continued that newspaper. And that's a newspaper we all should cherish. And because of the way it came about and the struggles that Leslie in particular, I was not interested in journalism. I'm interested in freedom and expression, and I would fight for it too. But Les went out and he laid this foundation. And it's a legacy, I think, that we should embrace. Not only those in journalism, but as a people. We should stand up for what is right, and we should defend our democratic institutions. So again, I want to thank Dr. Bob and others for inviting me to make the tribute to Les Lepierre. As I said, I mean, I didn't know what about Les before, but we became very good friends. Les, Lloyd, and myself were out of the 26. They had detained 3 of us, and we all contributed. We didn't hold anything against anybody. We came back and we all contributed toward the democratic process in our country. And I will urge those in the field of journalism to try to maintain that legacy of Les Lepierre of independence and standards. Those who work with Les Lepierre will know that he was a man of standards. He wouldn't settle for anything that is not up to standard. And we have to admire him for that. So again, I thank Dr. Bob and others for this opportunity. And I hope those in the field of journalism will take it serious. It is a very serious task you have ahead of you as journalists. And it's not just writing and reporting, but you have to get to the truth. As it is written, the truth will set us free. And we should be sincere and honest in our dealings as, not only as journalists, but whatever field we are in, we should try to be sincere and honest. Again, I thank you.
The truth will set us free. Thank you so much for sharing your tribute, Honorable Tillman Thomas. At this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, let's honor these legendary icons. I invite you to stand and let's have a moment of silence as we remember Lou Smith, George Grant, and Leslie Pear. Thank you. You may have your seats. I now invite to the stage the man responsible for the Bubb Report. He will do an official introduction of our guest speaker for this evening. And Dr. Kellon Bubb is an associate professor of media, journalism, as well as communication studies at the Montgomery College in Washington, D.C., in the United States of America. His foundation is in Grenadian media. He was trained by Ms. Sherma Wells, who you heard from today, the late George Grant, and he's also a community activist at heart, and he really and truly believes in public education. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. Welcome Dr. Kellon Bubb.
So the introduction to our guest speaker will actually be done by my young and talented producer, Ms. Surian Charles. And I have to credit my former producer, Mr. Kitaka Mawuto, who started with the Bubb Report when we initially commenced this program. Of course, Mr. Mawuto has moved on to bigger and better things, and now he's on the other side. And so I will be the one interrogating him now in the politics, but Mr. Charles will be doing the honors of introducing our guest speaker. Mr. Charles.
Thank you, Dr. Bubb, for that introduction. Good evening, everyone, and thank you sincerely for all being here tonight. I am proud and honored to introduce to you Dr. Didacus Jules, a distinguished leader in education, social transformation, and organizational re-engineering with an extensive career spanning national, regional, and international spheres. Since 2014, he has served as the Director General of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, leading the strategic integration and development efforts of 11 member states for over a decade. His career trajectory reflects a steadfast commitment to advancing education and policy reform across the Caribbean. His key leadership roles include Registrar and Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Examinations Council, Inter-Regional Coordinator of the International Literacy Support Service, Permanent Secretary for Education and Human Resource Development in St. Lucia, as well as Permanent Secretary for Education and Chief Education Officer in Revolutionary Grenada. Dr. Jules holds an impressive academic portfolio, including a Bachelor of Arts with honors from the University of the West Indies, Master of Science in Curriculum and Instruction from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Doctor of Philosophy in Education Policy, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and an Executive Master of Business Administration from the University of the West Indies. He has also served on several influential boards and advisory bodies, including the Caribbean Center for Educational Planning from UWI-MONA, Knowledge, Innovation, and Exchange Program, Global Partnership for Education in Latin America and the Caribbean region, Chancellor's Commission on the University of the West Indies Governance, and Caribbean Climate Accelerator and the World Bank Task Force on Caribbean Education Strategy 2020. In recognition of his significant contributions to national and regional development, Dr. Jules was awarded the prestigious St. Lucia Cross Gold from the government of St. Lucia. His most recent publication, Education for Uncertainty, Collected Speeches on Transforming Caribbean Education for Global Competitiveness, is a thought-provoking anthology of 25 speeches spanning over 3 decades. As a leading educator and policy expert, Dr. Jules explores the complexities of the modern world, defined by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and hyperconnectivity, and how they implicate education in the Caribbean. His work presents a visionary approach to reimagining education systems that foster resilience, inclusivity, and innovation in an ever-evolving global landscape. With over a decade of leadership at the OECS, Dr. Jules remains a pivotal figure in regional policy development, dedicated to shaping education and governance frameworks that empower Caribbean societies for the future. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Didacus Jules.
Former Prime Minister, the Honorable Tillman Thomas and Mrs. Thomas, Leader of the Opposition. Just a second, Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Emin Pierre, Attorney General, the Honorable Claudette Joseph, the Honorable Peter David, Dr. Ron Daniel, President of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, King's Counsel Douglas Ferguson, Media Association President and Storyteller Callista Faria, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, fellow Grenadians. Good evening, everyone. Let me first say what a deep honor it is to have been invited to deliver this inaugural memorial lecture at the Futures Ford Summit, and to do so in tribute to three towering figures, as we've heard, Leslie Pierre, Lou Smith, and George Grant. We pause in reverence of their blessed memory. These gentlemen were not just reporters of truth. They were defenders of democracy, chroniclers of our struggle, and believers in our potential. Their legacy compels us to speak clearly, think boldly, and act with urgency. I want to thank Dr. Kellen Bubb and Torchlight Independent Media for this inspired initiative that is about connecting homeland and diaspora in a shared search for answers. In these dystopic times, to appropriate Buju, you heard, I deliberately selected that section of his speech and you'll see of his song, and you'll see why later. In these dystopic times, truth like opportunity is a scarce commodity. And I begin tonight with a simple but pressing question. What does it mean to grow, to truly grow, when the world around us is shrinking? Remember, the topic I was asked to speak on is bucking the trend, strategies for Caribbean growth amidst global economic volatility. So what does it mean to grow when the world around us is shrinking? Shrinking in certainty, it is shrinking in stability, it is shrinking in cooperation, shrinking in spirit. What does it mean to grow when our elemental humanity is shrinking? Implicit in our topic tonight is a presumption that Caribbean growth is an economic holy grail, and that the essence of our struggle is contended with economic volatility. For much of the 20th century, economic growth, measured predominantly through gross domestic product, was heralded as the holy grail of national prosperity and social progress. This paradigm, rooted in classical and neoclassical economic thought, equated rising output with improved standards of living, assuming that growth would inevitably trickle down to uplift societies. However, over time, growing inequality, environmental degradation, and social discontent exposed the limitations of this narrow metric. The global financial crisis and the climate emergency catalyzed a shift in thinking from a singular focus on growth to broader conceptions of well-being. Today, frameworks like the Human Development Index and gross national happiness, believe it or not, gross national happiness, recognize that true prosperity lies not in just expanding economies, but in enhancing human dignity, social cohesion, and planetary sustainability. So let's contextualize the crisis. We are living in a time that scholars are now describing as a polycrisis, a condition where multiple overlapping crises collide and compound each other. So this isn't just about turbulence, it's about an age of transformation. We have witnessed a pandemic that has halted global movement and gutted tourism economies, a war in Europe that drove up global prices of food, fertilizer, fuel, climate disasters that arrive with increasing frequency and severity, Hurricane Beryl being just the latest reminder of how fragile our infrastructure and economies truly are. And now, a growing technological divide between artificial intelligence and automation threatening to leave entire regions behind. What is worse is that these crises do not happen in isolation. They reinforce each other, eroding trust in institutions, straining public finances, and deepening inequality. Add to this the retreat from multilateralism. The world's wealthiest powers now act more inwardly, more nationalistically. For small states, the safety net is shrinking just when we need it most. And as the UN Secretary General Guterres warned in his UN General Assembly address in 2022, and I quote, "We are gridlocked in colossal global dysfunction." What is our Caribbean condition? In this era of unpredictable and unprecedented change, in this global dysfunction, the Caribbean, and particularly small island states like the OECS, face disproportionate exposure. We import nearly 80% of our food. We are over-reliant on tourism and services. We suffer from limited fiscal space, rising debt, and high vulnerability to external shocks. Our health systems are stretched. Our education systems are sadly misaligned with the needs of the future. And we continue to lose many of our best minds to migration, victims of what I call aspirational exile. As Buju put it, and as you heard, who can afford to run will run, but what about those who can't? They will have to stay. Opportunity, a scarce commodity in these times, I say. When mama spent her last on San Diego class, never you ever play. It's a competitive world for low-budget people, spending a dime while earning a nickel, with no regard to whom it may tickle. My cup is full to the brim. I could go on, and the full has never been told. It has often been said that when the world sneezes, the Caribbean catches the flu. In fact, that was a favorite saying of Maurice Bishop. But now, the world has pneumonia, and we are expected to leap hurdles with our legs tied. Ladies and gentlemen, the global economic volatility we see is not temporary. It is the new normal. And if we continue adapting old models and failed solutions, a dependency on foreign aid, a reliance on narrow economies, whether monocrop agriculture or tourism, we will entrench our vulnerability. We must avoid the temptation to be doing the same thing over and over and expect different results. Einstein's definition of insanity. To buck the trend, therefore, is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. In an age of chaotic volatility, perplexing uncertainty, compounded complexity, and confusing ambiguity, we have no option but to buck the trend. It is the only chance of survival. It is the refusal to be spectators in our own story. And more than that, it is an act of faith. Faith in our capacity to transform, faith that our smallness is not our weakness, but our strategic advantage. So what must we do? Let me propose 5 imperatives for bucking the trend and seizing the future. 1, build economic sovereignty. We must invest in regional production and trade, agri-tech, climate-smart farming, sustainable fisheries, and regional food hubs can reduce our import bill. Remember, 80% coming from the north, from the US. Reduce our import bill and create jobs. We must shorten supply chains, not just for food, but also for fuel, pharmaceuticals, and digital services. Let's reimagine logistics, port cooperation, and OECS maritime transport as a backbone of regional resilience. Secondly, leverage the diaspora as a development partner. In 2023, the Caribbean diaspora repatriated 18.2 billion US dollars. The Caribbean diaspora. While specific data for OECS countries are limited, the available statistics suggest St. Lucia received approximately 150 million US in remittances in 2022. In that same year, Grenada received about 110 million in remittances, and Dominica received 90 million in remittances. But beyond remittances is a goldmine of expertise, investable capital, and global connections. We must move from sentiment to strategy, from homeland nostalgia to patriotic engagement, and that is for the diaspora. From waving flags at parades to raising foundations at home. From remembering where we came from to rebuilding what we left behind. And how do we actualize this? Here are some possibilities. Our government should issue diaspora bonds for green investment to the diaspora, providing more favorable incentives to the diaspora than we offer foreign direct investors as an expression of self-reliance. When a Grenadian invests in Grenada from abroad, they are not just investing to make more returns, they're investing to home, to family. Arrange remote internships and knowledge transfer, particularly for our young creatives, our techies, and our youth entrepreneurs. Establish virtual entrepreneurship ecosystems that span time zones and oceans. Do you know, for example, that there are 50,000 people in the OECS doing courses on Coursera? And many of these courses are in tech areas. Some of these young people are actually working remotely in our respective countries in the OECS, earning sometimes up to 10,000 US a month doing remote work. And we already have sons and daughters of the OECS diaspora who are tangibly demonstrating their commitment to home. And I'll give you one example. Dr. Nicholas Braffett of Grenada is one of the biggest black Silicon Valley's technopreneurs who has made his expertise and advice freely available to the OECS, advising young techies on how to scale up their innovations. We've just scheduled a meeting with him with about 3 groups of young techies from across the OECS. Has facilitated access through the Caribbean Science Foundation for scores of Caribbean youth to access higher education opportunities in leading universities such as MIT and Harvard. And Dr. Braffett, by the way, is an advisor to the governments of Singapore, what's the other one? Well, certainly Singapore and India in tech, high tech. The third opportunity or challenge is to embrace digital transformation. The next great leap for the Caribbean must be digital, not just broadband, but AI, artificial intelligence, blockchain, digital IDs, and e-government. At the OECS, we're just developing the OECS Learning Hub, which is one such giant and truly transformational step to building digital sovereignty in education. This innovation, which we will soon launch, was developed by 24 young techies from across the OECS, including Grenada. and it will be beneficial to students, parents, and education administrators. The cost of operating this digital ecosystem, which covers everything from lesson planning, assessment, individualized reports, the entire gamut of all what we pay for foreign software. The total cost of operating this system we've estimated to be $1 per student per child in the OECS. The total value of the software and digital subscriptions that this is intended to replace is $150 million across the OECS. I want these figures to sink in for you, because this is done by 24 young people, including a number of Grenadian youth, developing software as an alternative to what we potentially would spend $150 million to have in our education systems. So let's train our youth not just to use technology, but to create it, to code, design, and innovate. The fourth thing is to practice strategic non-alignment. In a multipolar world, we must avoid being pawns in someone else's chess game. As small states, let us adhere to the historical dictums of our visionary leaders who fought colonial domination and asserted, to quote Errol Barrow, that we must be friends of all and satellites of none. In the OECS, our independent member states are equally balanced between the People's Republic of China and Taiwan, 3-3. But this can or should be seen as a balance and not as a division, because we have an opportunity as small states that are seen as insignificant in some centers of global power to play a quiet and constructive role in building bridges rather than deepening chasms. Chinese civilization is 5,000 years old, and there should be no doubt in any of our minds, notwithstanding all the rhetoric on the international front, that given this lineage, the differences within this civilization can be resolved by the Chinese themselves. So let's not get caught in China versus Taiwan. Right? We are equally split between them, but they will resolve their problems. And perhaps we can play a role, given the 3-3 split, or balance in helping that process. Let us engage, therefore, with Europe, North America, the Middle East, and the Global South, and in particular, Africa, Latin America, Asia, on terms that reflect our needs, our vision, our priorities. We are not choosing sides in Cold Wars. We are certain Caribbean agency, said world. The Mighty Sparrow reminds us of this in his 1965 Calypso, Our Model Nation, where he says, we have no guns, we have no might, but we have justice on our side. So we can negotiate from a position of clarity and principle, not desperation. The fifth area is reimagining education and youth and women engagement. Too much of our education system prepares students for an economy that no longer exists. We must pivot ourselves from credentialism to capability, emphasizing creative and critical thinking, social responsibility, entrepreneurship, digital skills, environmental stewardship, historical consciousness, and civic innovation. Now, mind you, these are the things that we need to promote. I'm not calling these out as subjects, because we have a problem of subjectizing everything. Contrary to much of the rhetoric about education transformation in the Caribbean today, this is not a technical complexity, but a political necessity. I say this because we are still failing to properly define the purpose of education in our Caribbean at this historical moment. Sir Ken Robinson famously argued, and I quote, that the fundamental challenge and core purpose of education today is to nurture human potential in a way that aligns with the diversity of talents, creativity, and the unpredictable needs of the future, not the industrial models of the past. Now translate this to the OECS context and look at the rising tide of criminality among our youth, and we will conclude that education is not academic versus technical education. It is not simply and solely about credentializing, but also about character. It is not just about the memorization of knowledge, but about the actualization of what the UNESCO described as the 5 pillars of learning. Learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, learning to be, and learning to transform oneself and society. Put simply, all we need to do is make learning fun, develop critical thinking, a capacity for invention and innovation, build character, and shape responsible citizens. I close tonight with this, that the Caribbean is not behind the curve. We are on the edge of possibility. Yes, we are small, but that is our advantage. Small systems can and should pivot faster, innovate more boldly, and collaborate more deeply. OECS is a nice tight cluster within CARICOM. Let the Caribbean become the laboratory of the future, a model of how small states can thrive in a fractured world, a region that doesn't wait for help, but designs its own destiny. Let us not just survive volatility, let us shape the alternative, bend history to our collective courage, bucking the trend, not because we must, but because we can. Thank you.
Dr. Jules, so we want you to stay up here.
Okay.
Because we might entertain some questions. So, audience, let us thank Dr. Jules again. And just to give you some quick background as to how we were able to snag Dr. Jules. He's a very busy man. And this humble Bubb Report, we reached out to, of course, Margaret Francis is listening. She's an avid viewer of the Bubb Report. I reached out to her because she's one of my sounding boards, and I said, hey, this is the situation. The Honorable Mayor Motley, in fact, was carded to be our guest speaker. That was her first choice. Unfortunately, she was unable to attend. And so Margaret Francis, credit to you, who was able to work her contacts. And that is why we were able to get Dr. Jules. So thank you again, sir, for agreeing. And as fate would have it, you were already in Grenada. So thank you again. History. Grenada's rich diasporic history as well. If we think about the civil rights history of the world, the civil rights history of North America in particular, there are 2 Grenadians that have informed that struggle and that movement. One of them is the late, great Malcolm X, the other Audre Lorde. Of course, there is a delegation from the United States today who is in Grenada paying tribute to the mother of Malcolm X, who was born in Grenada, that is Louise Langdon Little. And it is my honor to invite to speak to us, just to give some greetings, Dr. Ron Daniels, a preeminent civil rights leader, intellectual, black intellectual, a man in whom I'm very, very proud to know and happy to know. Dr. Daniels, please come and address the audience. Yes.
Well, good evening, everyone. What an honor it is to be with you. And what an honor, Dr. Jules, to hear such a brilliant, inspiring lecture on the future of the Caribbean, and indeed, the lecture was for the whole African world. And I'm delighted to have been invited to be here and to have heard it. And Dr. Bubb, thank you so much for the invitation and the brilliant work that you do in inspiring people from all over the diaspora to engage with each other. Protocol having been established, but let me just recognize the former Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition who are here. I'm honored to be able to meet you and to greet you. And let me just say quickly that yes, we are here to uplift the legacy of Louise Langdon Little. And we don't do it really as sort of outsiders in a way. I am a longtime devotee of El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, our black signing prince, whose mother was born here, but his mother, we are discovering, was much more than just his mother. She was an activist. She was an organizer. She was someone who was a part of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and founded by, of course, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And his son is here with us, 93 years old, as a part of our delegation. And so to contextualize that part of an action agenda, I have to say that we are also here because we believe in Grenada. Because when I was coming up as a younger activist, we were inspired by the People's Revolutionary Government of Grenada, led by Maurice Bishop. And we connected with it because Grenada was this place that was dealing with the concept of a peoples-based democracy. And though, you know, there's always contradictions and controversy and whatever, but above all, for those of us from the outside, we were incredibly inspired by what we saw generating here. Because the kinds of systems of opposition that Dr. Jules talked about have to be challenged. And Grenada, this small island of 100,000 people, was challenging this global system that has wreaked havoc on African people from the Holocaust of enslavement to this current period. Unfortunately, of course, there was an implosion. There was a very painful implosion that took place. And so for people like myself, it was also very painful. And so coming back was very difficult until a couple of years ago when the Honorable Deacon Mitchell began the healing process by having All Heroes Day, and we were able to return and to connect. And in reconnecting, we wanted to reconnect because as a Pan-Africanist of long standing, my commitment is to try to support those civil society organizations and those nations that are helping us to reclaim our rightful place in history, at the forefront of history. And we see in its totality, Grenada has that possibility. And so we come within that context. And so we have an action agenda. In fact, it is eerie, the session we just had this morning on economic development. Some of the same concepts were being discussed and debated as we brought from all across the hemisphere some of the brightest and best economic theorists and practitioners. And we were talking about the same kinds of concepts of how we bring our people together. That lets me know that God is on our side, that we're in the right place at the right time in order to move forward. So I say that we're delighted to be here. We're having a series of forums, but on this coming Saturday in the village of the Dig, the space that Louise Langdon Little was born in was just a field that Terrence Wilson, a distant relative, was preserving, is being converted into a space and place that we will honor her life and legacy in an appropriate way. And we do this because we believe that ultimately people from all over the world will be coming to Grenada to visit that space. So we'll also have an economic benefit because there will be a source of cultural, historical tourism. And so in that spirit, we have come to share, to learn, and to work together. And I just conclude in the words that became so famous from here, because it is entirely necessary that we believe that we can move forward, that we shall never, ever go backward. So we say forward ever, forward ever. Thank you very kindly.
All right, audience. So at this point, I will join Dr. Jules. Dr. Jules, thank you again for joining us, and we want to use this opportunity. You know how I do on the Bubb Report. I do ask all questions. No questions are left unturned. No stone is left unturned. Let me put on the mic there. So what we want to do at this point is to engage the audience with any questions, comments, and thoughts that you might have in reflection on Dr. Jules' very important seminal lecture on how we as a Caribbean civilization, and to echo a lot of what Dr. Daniels articulated as well with respect to our development trajectory. But of course, as you think about questions, Dr. Jules, let's see if we can get this mic turned on. There we go. So Dr. Jules, we know that you were in Grenada during the Grenada Revolution. Of course, you're one of the progenitors of the Center for Popular Education. So can you talk about Grenada's development trajectory during that period and what we can learn from that period, those lessons that we can apply now in this global context?
Yeah, well, reflecting on the changes in education, I think a lot of what was done in Grenada during that period presages what really ought to have been done in the Caribbean as a whole. The start with the Center for Popular Education, the establishment of a national literacy campaign, 10,000 Grenadians learned to read and write in the space of 1 year. And the theme of the campaign was, if you know, teach; if you don't, learn. So we got assistance from Cuba with the organizational aspects, the mobilization aspects of the campaign. But the pedagogy of the campaign was actually designed locally. I had had some background in my sixth form years of working with the Folk Research Center and the Black Studies Group in St. Lucia. We taught literacy in the prisons in St. Lucia using Paulo Freire's methodology. So the whole idea was that literacy was not just about teaching people the word, to read the word, but also to read the world. And so that became the thematic of the literacy campaign. Immediately after the campaign, we proceeded to prepare a series of 4 textbooks which had mathematics, English, geography of Grenada, and science. These 4 subjects were strategically selected. And the reason for that was that in each of the 4 texts, you had the 4 subjects sort of combined. They were integrated. So for example, in one reading passage, you would have something about water in general and its importance to life. There'll be a corresponding passage in the science section talking about explaining water from a scientific perspective. In geography, there would be about the sources of water in Grenada, the rivers, the waterfalls. There'd also be practical activities built in where you'd have to do a visit to Annandale Falls and the lake and so on. And then in the mathematics section you would find mathematic problems relating to water. So for example, in your village in La Digue, there's a leaking standpipe. It leaks 5 gallons an hour. How much will be lost in the course of a day? And measure how much water you need in the household. And we tied that to some of the civic engagement of the revolution, where you would have these town hall engagements, you'd have community work being done on weekends. So the class could be mobilized to do a survey in the village to see all the leaking standpipes and the water wastage, do the mathematical calculations on that, and then invite WASCO to come in, the Water Authority to come in and assist, work with the community to repair the water problem in the community. One of the most exciting things for me in that process, I recall, we discovered that there was a Grenadian guy, a semi-literate agricultural worker, whose nickname was Cunha. And Cunha had discovered a way to get rid of the African beetle that was destroying the cocoa. So in one of the books, the reading passage was called Cunha the Inventor, with a picture of Cunha. I mean, just think of not just the symbolic, but the substantive significance of that, right? A semi-literate agricultural worker being hailed as an inventor because he found a way to get rid of the African beetle. So following that campaign, the literacy campaign, we prepared that material, and every school in Grenada was turned into an adult education center at night.
Now, Dr. Jules, I'm glad you articulate what occurred during the revolution. I'm sure you're probably familiar with the recent World Bank report on the state of education in the Caribbean. It does not paint a pleasant picture with respect to where we are. And I think we really have to link educational outcomes to economic outcomes as well. So if we are to confront the challenges that continues to confront the region, one would argue that education would have to be a starting point as one of those economic indicators if we are to be economically resilient. So can you talk about how we can reimagine our sort of colonial education systems, this rote memorization and this glorification of subjects? With all due respect to folks who have 50 and 60 subjects, I only graduated with 6 subjects because that's what my working class parents could afford, and my grandmother of blessed memory, Ms. Wilfina Williams, could afford at the time. But nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, reimagining the technical areas of education and reimagining, as you articulated, areas of tech that we can be relying on.
Well, one of the person who spoke about my biography, my background, mentioned I just published this book on education for uncertainty. And that book was actually published on the instigation of my wife, who, having looked at all the speeches I've done, said, but there's a consistent theme over more than 30 years calling for education transformation. And it really irks me as a Caribbean person that many of us in the Caribbean, we go way back, people like Professor Errol Miller and so on, for years have been talking about the need for education transformation. Yeah. But when the World Bank comes out with a study that says education is in crisis, then suddenly we all get hot under the collar because education is in crisis, because the World Bank says so.
The World Bank said so, yeah.
You know, and so this is a real problem. And what we don't realize, so we have failed to really address the decolonization of education. What we have today is just the tweaking of a colonial construct that was inherited that served the purposes of economy. So a lot of the discourse on education is about jobs, about economic opportunity, building the economy. Education, that's only part of the role of education. Education essentially is about building civilization, making people better people as a worker, as a parent, as a student, as a child, as a woman, as a man. You know, these are the things that we need to grapple with. And in this subjectization too of education, to believe that, okay, people are now doing 24 subjects. I used to be the registrar of CXC, and I can tell you that that is absolute nonsense, doing 24 subjects. What we need to do is define what are the core subjects that need to be done and ensure so a knowledge of your history, and not history as in when Columbus came, but our true history as Caribbean people that begins the decolonization of the mind and a knowledge of who we are and the dignity of who we are, and more importantly, the resilience of our ancestors that has brought us to where we are today. Then the understanding of how we learn to deal with each other. I mean, we see in the news all over the Caribbean the ease with which students now are, fights in schools, student gangs, all of these things. We complain about those things, but all of that points to the failure of education. That's the problem, because we are not teaching students. It's all about sitting in a classroom, being lectured to, notes put on the board, you copy the notes, you're given an exam, pass or fail. Nobody is engaging the students to make learning exciting for them, to make it fun, for them to learn to work with each other. I have seen videos, and I just was part of a tour put on by the EU to Finland and Estonia and these places. I mean, some of what these people are doing is incredible, but it's nothing that's alien in the Caribbean. You know, you have, for example, in Japan, even at kindergarten level, every class in a school is given an assignment on a rotating basis. So there are students on a given day who will prepare the light lunch guided by the chefs in the school canteen, but the students do the work to prepare the meals for their peers. Then another group does the cleaning of the school. When I went to primary school in Castries, at the end of every day, we sang a song, bits of paper lying on the floor, pick them up. And we cleaned the classroom. Now, there were cleaners for the school, but at least it taught us, you dirty the classroom, you clean it. Nowadays, parents would say, I don't send my child to clean the class. But they don't even teach the children to clean at home or to, take responsibility for themselves. So these are very fundamental failures of the education system that does not require huge expenditure by governments. And talking about expenditure, there's a huge invisible wastage in education in the Caribbean. And let me give you one example. In one particular OECS member state, the Prime Minister asked me to do an assessment of their system. If you look at the secondary level, let us say hypothetically, 100 students enter in Form 1, and you track them up to Form 5. Only about, say, 60, 65 of them are left. They're dropouts for different reasons. Then of the 60 of them who are left, time to sit CXC exams, maybe 55 of them will sit the exam. Because the principal may say, you see, you, Bob, you're not bright enough, you may not get, I don't want my school grades and standards to go down, so go and do it privately, or they don't allow you to do it. So you're down to 50 or 55. And then, of that number, only about 30-something% of them get 5 or more subjects, including English and maths, which is the benchmark for progress beyond secondary education. Now, when you calculate per capita cost of education, not counting parental investment, what the state pays for a student at secondary school, teachers' salaries, the whole cost of education amortized by the number of students at the secondary level, the wastage amounts to over 40-something million EC dollars over that 5-year period. Now, meanwhile, ministries of education, this rhetoric, no child left behind. But we live in all these children.
Yeah. So we have a question. Audience member, please identify yourself and pose your question.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Niels Chaitin, International Crime Reduction Specialist. I feel like I'm on the Bubb Show, by the way. Dr. Jules, it was an excellent lecture this evening, and I gained quite a lot of insights through your lecture. However, I wanted to ask you what your take is. Well, let me frame it this way. I've worked in about 10 different Caribbean islands. I'm born Grenadian, lived 42 years of my life in Toronto. And as a crime reduction specialist, I've traveled the world, really, including your island, of course, of St. Lucia, where we spent some months in 2023 visiting your Bordelais correction facility. Dr. Jules, everywhere we go, you go to Jamaica, you go to St. Kitts and Nevis, you go to come to Grenada, there is an overflow in our prisons. Currently, we have about 379 inmates. Well, when I did the check last week, in His Majesty Prison here in Richmond Hill. Out of the 379, we have 5 women. Bordelais, when I went to Bordelais 2024, there were 511. Out of the 511, 15 were women, the rest were guys. When we look at the overwhelming number of men in jail, and we trace it back to the school system, we see that over 80%, and you could take any school across the Caribbean, and I've been there, up to 80% of the students that are suspended are males. So you look at it, suspension from school, where do they end up? When we look at the records, when we speak to them, most of them, I'm not saying all, most of them are high school dropouts. In North America, and I worked for 15 years with the Toronto District School Board, the home of 578 schools. And they are now trying to move away from suspensions or at-home suspensions. And they are bringing a model of in-school suspensions. You may have to get a boy, and I say a boy here because the majority of the time, it's a boy. We may have to get him away from a particular environment, but we don't send him home. The city of Toronto, the police, Toronto police, told me personally that 42.8% of the teenagers that they arrest in the malls and where have you are teenagers on suspension. Can't we see where this is going? From school, if not well handled, watch where they end. Bordelais, sir, Richmond Hill, sir, wherever they are. My question to you is, what is your suggestion in terms of suspensions?
Well, it's not even a suspension issue. It is, again, how are we handling students in school? It is about the education process. I tell people that when I went to school, I was a member of a gang. That was what, in the late 60s, but my gang was Sea Scouts, cadets. That was a gang. Because no, this is a serious point. As an adolescent male, you look for forms of identification and being part of a group and so on. If we don't create positive forms of association, or avenues of association for young males, they are going to get lost in the different gangs, right? The adolescents, their sense of malehood gets corrupted by the criminality in the wider society. And now with the influx of drugs, it makes it even worse because they become drug mules, they become drug users. So it's really about all of these things are just symptoms of our failure in the education system, right? The other big mythology that has been pushed in the education is that now I see the World Bank and everybody is on a kick about TVET in education. Now, get me clear on this. I have nothing against TVET. But I believe that behind our approach to TVET is still the old colonial ideology that if you can't learn with your head, we'll teach you to use your hands. So you're not bright enough, you're not learning, we teach you skills. In today's world, the skills of today that would give somebody a good livelihood are not the manual skills. You teaching carpentry using a manual saw and hammer and so on, it doesn't cut it anymore. I remember as PS education in St. Lucia, 2 weeks before we reopened school, the entire floor in a primary school collapsed. And we had to, obviously, we didn't want to postpone the opening of school. We had to hustle to get some crew that could get it done. We advertised put out tenders, but insisted that whoever tendered must have power tools to do this quickly. A guy came and did this with 4 other guys, the entire school flooring, in 3 days. They had power hammers, power saws, everything. And within 3 days, they fixed the school. Now, a job like that would have taken 2 weeks to complete using just manual equipment. And more than that, think of the turnover for somebody with power tools doing that job. In the time he takes to do that, he can probably do 6 other jobs that guys who are using manual tools are doing. So, it's a whole different mindset. And one of the things I've been advocating to ministries of education is that, yes, skills are very important. One, we have to ensure that the skills training is not treated as a thing that you're not bright enough to learn academic. Part of the ideology is that even teachers will tell you there are students who are not academically minded. No child is born not academically minded or academically minded. It is how we socialize and teach them. Now, comprehensive education is what I think we should be doing. In St. Lucia, and I believe in a couple other OECS countries, you have these comprehensive schools that the Canadians built 50 years ago, where you teach both so-called academic subjects and TVET subjects. And both of them have what we call parity of esteem. So you have students doing a mix of subjects. And some of the best technical and tradespeople are persons who have come through that schooling, that form of comprehensive schooling. So we really have to reinvent this thing in a serious way. And it's not just about exams. It's not just about subjects. It's about attitudes, providing opportunities. Every students, and reinventing some of the forms of association. Students may not be interested in scouts and guides anymore because this is not attractive for the age. What forms of association do they want? We've just started an OECS Robotics Association, thanks to the Ministry of Education and Dr. Neil in St. Kitts and Nevis. He's been very passionate about robotics. And since they were so successful in doing the robotics thing in the education system, we said, well, why don't we just spread this thing through the OECS? And we've had students from the OECS go to Singapore and get prizes in robotics. So it is the kinds of challenges that you put before them and the opportunities you create for them to fly as high as they need to go.
Very well said. Any other questions? Do we have any other questions from the audience? I see we have some educators in the room. Mr. Charles, I'll put you on the spot. Do you have any questions? I see Miss Faria has a question. Miss Faria.
You just see me? Really? Good night. Director General, I did not acknowledge you when I gave my presentation. I'm so sorry. I was nervous. My question is, the rethinking, the remaking, the reshaping of our education system in the Caribbean is a matter of survival. We look at how we're now jumping through hoops over the global trade war and the tariffs and all of that and trying to figure out how we find our space. And now we're reacting to a situation that's come upon us. We've been talking about what's needed for education for the longest while. From where you sit with a holistic view of what's happening within the OECS, what would you say is the biggest barrier to us moving more aggressively to make those important changes that are required to be made? For example, my son, he had to teach himself coding because there's nothing like that in the school that he attends. We're trying to get it to happen. It's not happening. He taught himself how to code and he's coding. But so there's a lack of opportunities that are there. And for me, where I stand as a parent, as a journalist, it just seems like it's so simple to do. What is stopping us from aggressively moving forward to creating an environment where we can have a worthwhile education system that serves the needs of the Caribbean into the future?
It's unfortunate you asked me that question because if I have to tell you the truth, I would say the biggest barrier are our educators themselves. Because people are so conservative, they just stick with what they know. And we can't effect change by doing the same thing. You heard me say earlier, Einstein's theory. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And again, we've imbibed the ideology of the colonial inheritance in education. This is not an academic construct. We believe that there are children who are bright and those who are dull. As I said, nobody is born bright or born dull. Science has shown that there are 7 styles of learning. Are we catering for that in our pedagogy? If you come in front of a class and you put notes on the blackboard or you make students read from a textbook, that's not learning. You need to engage them. They need to be provided. Things need to be problematized as challenges for students that would excite them to find solutions. That is the best approach to learning.
So we need to educate our educators? Really?
Yeah. But mind you though, there are persons in the system who are very inventive, who are very dedicated. those teachers who have a genuine interest in their students, some of them even without training, teachers college or whatever, are able to find ways of engaging students because they move in from a position of love and concern for their students. And they understand the students. They know what the problems are. They know why this child is disruptive because of maybe the home environment or because they don't have sufficient nutrition, they're hungry coming into school. They understand those things. And by knowing their students, they find ways to reach them.
Thank you. If we do not have any other questions, we have one question here by an educator. Yes, Ms. James.
Good night, all. Over the years, I've noticed I want to go back to the boys. I'm quite passionate about boys. I'm a mother of 3 girls, but over the years, I'm seeing a decline. So I've taught at the elementary all the way up to the secondary. So they come in with a lot of enthusiasm, the excitement, they're jolly, they're smiling. By the time they get to grade 2, the excitement starts to dwindle. Grade 3, a few of them drop out by the time CPA, a few of them move on into secondary school. Form 3, they practically, again, a few of them, onto CXE. And you will see so many of the girls, and you're wondering, well, where are the boys? Those that are moving on to university, the girls again. Now, I have a theory. I'm not too sure if it is correct, but I just wanted to get your insight. I like to observe, and I'm noticing that over the years, we have quite a lot of females in the system. And I'm not saying that females don't do a good job, but from my experience, there are things that a female cannot give a male student. And so what I've noticed over the years, boys are not engaged in the school system. I could give you an example. And I had to literally, as a KG teacher, say, I have to start thinking like a boy in order to teach the boy, because when we're about to color, the first thing we're going to pull for boys, for the class, is a flower. And a boy may want to color a car. And when we decorate in the class, as a female teacher, we want to put a little pink and a little, I'm not saying that the pink is assigned to a girl, but I'm just saying, I think my theory is we have a little too many females in the system and not enough male role models for the boys, and not enough people who can engage them. He's quite correct that a lot of the boys are suspended, and it's because they don't feel stimulated in the classroom. They don't feel that at times that you're reaching them. And sometimes it requires for us to reflect on ourselves as educators and say, well, okay, I need to see it from their perspective to reach them so that they don't drop out of the system. That's my theory. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure why we have so many more female teachers than we have male teachers now in the system, but for whatever the reasons, that is the reality. And the approach that needs to be taken is that I believe that people need to take, there's a saying that it takes a village to raise a child. So that needs to be actualized in the education system. Parents, teachers, the community needs to play a more dynamic role in this. So for example, it doesn't matter that you may have in a school 80% of the teachers as female, but do we encourage parents, for example, the male parents, the fathers, to come into the school and do activities with the boys? You know, whether it's football, sort of quote-unquote male activities. Talk to them, engage them in activities like that boys would do to provide some sort of male mentorship to them so that they are people that they can relate to. The other thing too is the lure of crime in the society. They actually target young boys to be involved in crime. I remember a teacher saying to me that she was having a discussion with her class about what they want to be when they grow up. And a young boy actually said to her, I want to be a drug dealer. Why? Because he has a teacher, how much are you making? And you know, on the block, I can make that in 2 days. So, you know, there are all of these external influences that need to be fought in a very dynamic way, in a way that keeps students focused on their own development, taking responsibility for themselves, providing guidance, but doing that in an environment that is exciting, that is challenging for them. Boys tend to be restless in a classroom. If you have to sit in a row of chairs for how many hours in the school day and just listen or take notes from a blackboard, that doesn't cut it. And again, that has ripples all through. We need to, it's not just a single initiative that will solve the problem. So what is the role of sports in schools, right? To get students active and engaged, get them burn some of that excess energy, the boys especially. How can we integrate subjects in a practical way? Like what I described we did with the CPE. Get students going out there and seeing the problems in society, taking challenges and creating solutions from using their knowledge, the knowledge of education, to create solutions in your community, in your household. That way you begin to actualize yourself because you realize what the potential is. It's no accident that whenever you just try setting up a robotics or some IT challenge in a school and see how many students would be attracted to that. I remember as PS Education, St. Mary's College invited me. Well, I was talking to the principal and asked, why aren't you teaching history in school? They're like, nobody wants to do history. I said, okay, can you arrange for me to have a session with the 4th and 5th formers? I went to the school with a computer and a game called Age of Empires, which, by the way, I've been playing for the last 10 years. Right? You start with a primitive society and you build it up to higher and higher levels of civilization. I just, on a large screen, started playing the game and explaining to them what we were doing. And they were rapt attention. And then we start deconstructing the thing. I'm like, okay, guys, you see, so for me to move from one level of civilization to the next, I have to build my economy. Right? As I build my economy and I do research and I invest in technology, I have more scientific tools, more sophisticated weapons. I have to build an army because if I get attacked by the other side in the computer and I have not developed an army with a good economy, I get invaded. My economy becomes their wealth. You know, and I mean, total attention. Do we approach history like that? No. Now, again, here's another challenge. Our more advanced techies, and so Ron, Dr. Ron Professor Ron would really relate to that. That Age of Empires is something done by probably white gamers, you know, people in the metropole designing those things. What if we were to do a game like that about the evolution of black civilization and take it through the stages? So in building your society, the universities of Timbuktu and Zimbabwe, you show the evolution. What have they developed in terms of steel, the development of steel? The Industrial Revolution in the UK came about because African slaves in Jamaica had a technique of dealing with steel that helped spark the metal working of the Industrial Revolution. So we need to design our own games and artifacts and so on that can excite those students to be part of the process and to learn about themselves and discover their own potential in the process.
Food for thought. Quick intervention, Dr. Chaitan, and then we'll get to closing comments. Yes.
Dr. Bubb. Dr. Jules, I hear you. I hear you about the white culture and games that may have simulate the white lifestyle or whatever it is. But in the Caribbean here, Dr. Jules, in your country, in my country, we have black boys here that are patterning their lifestyle not after the white folks in America and Canada, but the guys in the ghettos. And that's all black boys in the ghettos, in the Crips and the Bloods. And you see them down here with their bandanas around their head, the baby blue, the Crips. Some of them don't even know where it's coming from. I saw one boy in the carnage with a red one in that pocket and the blue one on his head. He'll get shot for that out there. But that's what we have influencing down here. So that even, right now, Dr. Jules, we're talking about $1 million. Look who is in jail now. Look who is in the court. And the boys are saying that P. Diddy is in court. This guy's a multi-billionaire. Look, well, he's a music mogul, so he probably made money through the music, but what else did he make money from? And we watching our boys and saying, well, hey, you know what, man? Like you said a while ago, I don't have to work for 40 hours. I could sell some weed. I could sell some cocaine and make it. Before I leave and shut my mouth, I wrote an article. My last, by the way, I'm a columnist. The last month's column was entitled Boys to Men, a Maladaptive Criminal Maturation Process. Dr. Jules, what we are seeing in our high schools, and I worked in Bocage in Castries. I've worked in Beanfield South, right? What we are seeing in our schools, we are seeing weapons, we are seeing cutlasses and knives in our school. The problem is, there is a break. When I was growing up in Grenada, Grenada, when I was a young boy on the block at 10 years old, and the bigger boys were hanging out there, when I went in a company, they wrapped me and sent me home. Not now. Everybody is man. On the block, everybody is man. So that when you're on the block and you're hanging out and you wear your earrings too, I'm not knocking earrings, right? And you're wearing all your paraphernalia, the gang stuff, and you're 15 or 14, you're in Form 3, you're in Form 4, you're on the block, you're on the bridge with the big men. As a matter of fact, I have one situation that I mentioned in this article. In Grenada here, we are 9-year-old were made to commit petty crimes for the guys on the block. And when he brought the booty, guess what? Guess what I called him? The boss. Now this boy goes to school. This guy's 14 years, right? Well, not a 9-year-old, a 14-year-old boy. He goes to school. He's a man. You don't mess with me on the block, man. I got my piece. I got my weapon with me. But then he goes to school in an age-appropriate class. And he did something. An authority come up against him. Guess what? He switches from a child. And the man attitude from the block rises up in him. There are places where they hide cutlasses to go and retrieve it when the fight starts. So I'm saying to us, we have issues here. And where is the principal? Ma'am, we got issues. Dr. Jules, we have to look at how our boys are maturing. What are the things that are influencing them?
Yes.
Challenge you then. Can I challenge you then? Because
I'll stay for it.
I think we all agree that we have problems, we have challenges. You've described it eloquently. The question is, what do we do about it, right? And how can we deal with it? We need to analyze the problem at many levels. There's a wider level of the media and how it glorifies this P. Diddy guy, for example, as an image of a successful black singer, and the kind of what his example does for other young people, the influence of the gangs, the lure of money on the street. We know all of these things. How then can we deal with it? And that's why I'm saying we need to there's no single approach or solution to that. We need to have an integrated approach. The role of the churches, the role of parents have a critical role to play. Fathers have a role to play, right? The commercial sector, everyone, there has to be a coalition to try to change that culture. And the media has a role to play in that as well.
Don't miss the home, please. Don't miss the home.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. I said parents.
Right. Okay.
So This has to involve the type of discussion we have in here now should be the discussions that are held in PTA meetings, right, with parents, including some of the gang parents. Because mind you, as dread as a gang father may be, he know the life and the risk. Some of these gang leaders don't want their children to follow in these footsteps, you know. There are some of them who recognize the dangers. So it's how you really create that coalition in the society to begin to change things.
Dr. Chaitan, thank you so much. We do have another question.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nisha McIntyre. First of all, Dr. Jules, thank you for your spirited and very thought-provoking lecture about the integration and the way we can move forward as a region. Around the question of education and what happens next, I'm curious as to your perspective about the introduction of self-development and self-awareness courses into the curriculum from a very young age. And I'm speaking about courses that teach children how to self-regulate, how to redirect trauma into positive activity, how to reflect inward so that even though there is activities or there may be challenges in the neighborhood and their community and their homes, they don't let those challenges override their potential to move forward. And I say this because I work with an organization called Reach Within. They support children who are traumatized and live in the care homes in Grenada. And we oftentimes come across kids who their best bet to learn is in the school system because they don't have that support where they live. They don't have good support in the homes. They don't have good support in the community. But in the absence of getting it in the school, they turn obviously to the streets, or they turn to their friends who may not necessarily be the most intellectual or wise person to show them what they need to do. So for me, I'm wondering whether or not there shouldn't be that level of curriculum or that subject introduced where children are learning how to deal with these negative feelings and the negative behaviors that welled in them. Because you can teach a child academics, you can teach a child skill. If they can't self-regulate, they can know everything in the world, but they will self-sabotage. And I'm curious to your perspective on that.
Well, you're not going to achieve what you're talking about by subjectizing those things. I said that earlier, right? Because if everything becomes a subject, we overburden the curriculum. I think the key thing here is the pedagogy, how you interact with students. It is the approach that we take in things. You don't have to. I remember having an argument with actually a prime minister at one time when I was at CXC. He called saying, Didacus, you all need to create a subject, critical thinking. We need to teach critical thinking. I'm like, I'm sorry, CXC cannot do that. You know what critical thinking is? Mathematics properly taught is critical thinking. English literature, which only maybe 5% of those doing English do, because they just do English language and not English B, which is literature. English literature is literary criticism, is critical thinking. Every subject taught properly is critical thinking. So it's really a question of pedagogy, it's a question of method. That is where we fail in the system. You get my point?
Dr. Jules has certainly given us some food for thought, so we want to thank him again with a round of applause. So folks, those of you who are also joining us virtually, we thank you. I want to especially shout out Margaret Francis in Brooklyn, New York. Margaret is an avid supporter of the Bubb Report, and in fact, whenever I make a mistake on the Bubb Report, she's the one that yells at me after the program. And I'm still humble enough to take the criticism because that's how I will continue to persist, and that is how the Bubb Report will continue to maintain its standard. And I want to make this point. There is an African proverb that speaks, a South African proverb that speaks to I am because we are, the principle of Ubuntu. And in my summation, I just want to make the point that I am because of the media practitioners who were and who are. Of course, Ms. Kalisha Faria is here, but there is another media practitioner, veteran journalist, who is here, veteran broadcaster, that I want to recognize at this point. Mother, I will call you mother now, not even auntie. Mother Josephine Maguire, please stand. Take a bow. And of course, Ms. Josephine Maguire still calls me after an error that I would make on the Bubb Report and said, hey, your grammar was wrong there. The syntax was off there. This was historically inaccurate. What did you mean by that? And it reminded me of the occasion when Mr. Leslie Pierre did the same thing to me. When I worked at the Grenada Broadcasting Network, I was the 2 o'clock news anchor. And he would call me, he would say, Kellen, what was that? What did you just read? Did you check the script? That's not what I taught you. I did not teach you that from The Voice. I'm very bad at impressions. But as I begin my summation, the point I wish to make is that I will not be the person I am today without the tutelage of Mr. Grant, Leslie Pierre, Lou Smith, Sherma Wells, Kalisha Faria, Josephine Maguire, the late Anthony Jericho Greenidge. All of these media greats informed and continue to inform who I am. And I think it's important that we recognize the work that they have done. You know, there are a lot of, and I will say this, and those who follow me on Facebook, my personal Facebook page, that is, and some of my classmates from PBC know that I have a mouth on me and I speak my truth, cost it what it will. There is an attitude these days that some of us think we're better than others in respect of receiving feedback. There is nothing wrong with receiving criticism and feedback. And Josephine knows this very well. When I worked at the GBN, it was a rough and tumble environment. But I took that feedback to heart from Lou and Jojo and others. And that is why I am the person I am today. So I'm very grateful to them for that. And before I continue, I want to acknowledge the families. Of course, George Grant's brother is listening from Toronto. That's Mr. Ian Grant. And I want to acknowledge Lou Smith's and Leslie Pierre's family. I want to invite you to stand now, please. Thank you so much for giving us Lou to the national community. And of course, we want to sincerely thank Dr. Jules for accepting our invitation to be our inaugural Future Forward Summit guest speaker this evening. Indeed, we want to also thank our corporate sponsors in Grenada and in Brooklyn, New York, S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, the Investment Migration Agency Grenada, George F. Huggins and Company Limited, as well as Range Developments, for making this inaugural event possible. And of course, the truth is I was thinking about this activity for upwards of 2 years. How would I remember the greats? And of course, you said it so eloquently that this is certainly an important event that I'm committing to continuing into the future. So again, I want to thank all of you. We do have a lot of subject matter experts in the room. I see Mr. Grimes here. I see Mr. Sam and his wife here. I see others, of course, Comrade Lewis. I was a member of the Technical and Allied Workers Union back in the day and appreciated those struggles. Reese Sam, Janelle McDonald, of course, Dr. Daniels and others. I want to thank all of you for attending this marquee event. And my commitment to you is that the Bubb Report will continue to make its impact and make its mark on the Grenadian community. You do need unbiased truth tellers. You do need people with a conscience in the way that Leslie Pierre was, George Grant was, Lou Smith was. Because without that, in this digital ecosystem in which we live in, where truth is increasingly diluted by the ecosystems in which we belong, we do need independent voices to be able to call balls and strikes without fear or favor. and without worrying about what the political directorate, whatever the political directorate dictates. Of course, they can't say anything to me regardless. It doesn't matter who they are. But the public has a right to know, and as journalists, we ought to ensure that as journalists, we go into the space without any agendas. Our agenda should be truth. Our agenda should be objectivity. Our agendas should be justice with respect to articulating the voices of the voiceless. Our agenda should be country and nation building. So thank you again for attending this inaugural event. Thank you so much.